All right, it is time. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Black Hills Information Security webcast. If you're joining us, thank you so much. We're going to talk about backdoors and breaches today. It's an incident response card game that we created back in 2019, and it's been distributed probably over 100,000 times over the last couple of years. Now there's expansion decks, and there's play mats, and there's an online version where you can play for free. And so we're introducing the expansion deck today with our friends from Trimarc. So we can go to the next slide, but here's how this kind of works, right? Like at some point, we ran out of attacks. Like we came up with the core deck, we came up with the expansion deck, and then other companies came and said, could we make an expansion deck? And at first we're like, no, that seems like a lot of work for us. And then we tried it with Huntress. And it went really well. And so we then tried it with Red Canary and it went really well. And we tried it with Den Secure and it went really well. And then Trimarc's like, can we do it? And we said, yes, you're the last. You're the last ones we're going to do.
After us, they didn't want to do no more.
Yeah.
We've had multiple people come and say, hey, like,
yeah. Now, if you're out there listening and you want to make an expansion deck with us, you can always reach out to us through the contact us form on blackhillsinfosec.com, and we will meet with you and we'll tell you the amount of work it's going to be. And then if you decide you want to go and do that amount of work, then sure. And Trimarc, that's what you did. So Trimarc, we told them how much work it was going to be, and we said, it's up to you. Like, if you want to do this, do it. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. And then they came back and said, we want to do it. And they did the work. And so they did a lot of work, guys. What you're about to see is a ton of work. But before we move on to that, Danny and Trimarc team, can you tell me what Trimarc is, what you do, and why you wanted to do an expansion deck?
Yeah, Trimarc is a professional services company. We specialize in Microsoft Active Directory and Entra ID. I pronounce it Entra just to take off our head developer, Jared. Entra, whatever you want to call it. And we also have a new product out called Trimarc Vision. We're Active Directory. That's our thing. Our founder and CTO, Sean Metcalf. A lot of people know him. adsecurity.org is a mainstay in the AD space. So we go and we go to our clients and they want to figure out what's wrong with their AD, if they're having any holes, configuration issues, but we do it from an operational standpoint. Like, we don't just go and go, here's how your baby is ugly and good luck. We go in and we do an assessment. It's a very long assessment. And then we help people fix their AD. That's what we do. And the other guys on my team who are here right now, which is Dev, Brandon, and Jake, they are all part of that senior assessment team. Jake actually leads our Active Directory assessment. Brandon leads our MCSA assessment, and Dev is here.
Oh, thanks.
I have one of those too. His name's Ryan. All right. Yeah. So
why do I make fun of Danny all the time?
So the one thing that we are not doing today, we're not playing backdoors and breaches. And so if you've never played backdoors and breaches, we have videos on how to play backdoors and breaches. What we're going to do today is we're going to go through all the attacks that Trimarc wanted to create. So as you just listened, they have a specialty. They have a thing that they care about more. And so they have a different perspective. And so those different perspectives created different attack cards. And then you can use those attack cards when you're playing backdoors and breaches. Now, as we go through this, like if you want to learn how to play backdoors and breaches, we have videos for you to do that. But essentially it's this. How did the attackers initially compromise an organization? How did they pivot and escalate through that system, through the environment? How did they maintain persistence? And how did they use command and control and exfiltrate data? Like, those are the 4 parts of the attack. And so Trimarc came up with those 4 parts of the attack that made sense to them. Now, when making an expansion deck, we have to make sure that any new card fits in with the core deck and fits in with the other cards. And so that's where Deb and I come in. We know all the cards and all the things that have ever been created. We played this game over 250 times so far with other organizations. And so we know how it all works. And so when they're like, what about this? We're like, no, that doesn't work. I'm sorry. No. What about this? Like, no, I'm also sorry. What about this? I'm like, that's fantastic. That's good. All right, so let's move on. Next slide. There's an online version of this game. If you go to play.backdoorsandbreaches.com, you can play online for free, which is what you just saw on the previous slide. And you can actually find all the assets and everything that makes it work online and download it from GitHub and bring it into your own environment and use it the way that you want to use it. So if you don't want to use the publicly available version, you can bring it in. If you want all the PNG files of all the cards and you want to create your own cards, have at it. Like, We open sourced it. We want this to be a tool that you can use in order to get your tabletops done, to fix your security and improve the things that you do at your organization. So next slide is where, if you don't want to just do the free GitHub version, you can buy the physical cards from our online store. Now, the store is called the Spearfish General Store. So your bank may reach out to you after you complete that purchase and go like, this is a red flag. That's happened a few times. And so if you're willing to click on a link to the Spearfish General Store, first of all, thank you for trusting us. Like that means a lot. Seriously, that means a lot. But you can go ahead and purchase those decks, and then they get mailed to you. Pretty much anywhere in the entire world. There's only a few countries we don't send to. You'll figure that out by going to the store. And if we send to your country. All right, moving on. Okay, so before we get started, as we get started, essentially, we're going to go through all the different cards here, but these are the 2 procedure cards that we added to the Trimarc deck. We try never to add procedure cards to the game. Like if we can avoid it, we avoid it, because once you add a procedure card to the game, then you have to retroactively make it fit for the core deck, and so it's not easy. So these cards were created for the cloud security expansion deck, and they seem to be relevant for the deck that we were creating with Trimarc. And so there are these 2 cards. And so if you have the cloud deck, you also get these 2 cards in the cloud deck. And we just want to make sure if you didn't have the cloud deck and you got the Trimarc deck only, that you had the cards that you needed. So those are replicated cards. But cloud event log analysis, right? Being able to go through your cloud event, taking a look at that. And then permissions audit was another procedure card that the defenders, the blue team, could do in order to try to determine what the attacks are. Now, once again, if you haven't played this game before, this might not make sense to you, but it's what we're trying to do is to get defenders and organizations to like, are you looking at your cloud event logs? Are you doing an audit of permissions for each one of your users? Are you doing these things? And if you are, then that's potentially how you'll catch attacks or stop attacks. All right. So now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to move into the attack cards, and this is where Trimarc's going to take over and explain what happened. So next slide. Okay. I remember the first time you told me about Forest Trust. And I was like, are you messing with me? Like what's a forest? And what, like, I don't understand any of this. Because so the way this works is that they have to explain the cards to Deb and I. If they can't explain them to Deb and I, then that means you can't explain it to high school students, which means you can't explain it to college students, which means you can't explain it to people who work in cybersecurity. So if you can explain it to Deb and I, then it's good to go. Yeah. And so Forest Trust, explain it. What is this?
I'll give it to you, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, leading the service, right? Got to talk about it. So a forest is basically a collection of all the domains in your network. You could have one domain, or you could have 77 domains, and they are all under a forest. And then you can take one forest owned by one company, and that can trust the forest of another company. For example, like a parent company and a child company. They could have a trust between each other. And then you can share resources between, and people in one forest can log into the other forest, and vice versa, depending on how it's all set up. So, this was it's something quite common that we see a parent company having ownership over a smaller company and setting a trust up between the two.
And so if you take a look at the cards, you have the basic headline, right? The Forest Trust. And so that helps you create the scenario of what's going on, right? Like a companies compromise, and then because of the trust that they have with the other forests, that's how they gain access. But then we have the tools like Get AD Trust, PS Exec, PowerSploit, CrackMap Exec, right? Like those are the tools that you would essentially use to do this. And then we have some links down below to help explain a little bit better. And if you're like, but I can't click on the physical card, that is correct. But on the online version, the links are available. All right. So AI generated script. Essentially, as we were starting this last year, ChatGPT was becoming a thing. And so since it was becoming a thing, we had to talk about what that thing was. And some cards were, not accepted in the deck, and some cards were, and some cards evolved. I remember this being a card that evolved from what it was to what it became. So explain this AI generated script.
I'm going to pass this over to Dev because I believe he wrote this one. And this also feels right up his alley.
Yep, thanks. So ChatGPT, as you know, is basically just a language model that you can give it some type of verbiage or sentence, and it would take that and construct stuff for you. But one of the things it could also do is write code. Now, if you go to this general ChatGPT or some of the more famous ones out there, they're going to kind of try and lock it down so they can't do malicious stuff or do any type of scripts that they feel that could cause harm to others. But you can actually download LLMs. Those are the language models that ChatGPT and other services uses. And there's ones where they've been desensitized. So they took out all the restrictions from them. And then you run them locally or you run them whichever cloud provider or whatever system you have. And now you can actually generate malicious scripts. And I know some people say, well, you can also do that ChatGPT if you do the following things. Yes, there's ways to obfuscate your way of talking to ChatGPT so it can have a history and a profile with you to then generate scripts. But those scripts are generally not as good as getting one that you use a model that's like a coded model that's been decentralized. So that way it can then hyper focus on the type of scripts you actually want to get out there. So that is something that's been in the market for a while and people has been using it. So it just made sense for us to add it. With LMs taking off the way it is, it's just going to get even more crazy.
You can even see in the bottom of the card, we link a resource link because part of this, right, Jason, like had to be like, can we resource, like, can this actually be a thing? We couldn't just write a card that like would never happen ever because that's not really fair and it's not that fun. Even in that link, it's just like, it's happy to write it. It's just really bad at it. So now
the resource link is a subject matter talking about it, not actually how to do it, because obviously that would not be the right thing to do. So
and if you take a look at, we have detections, like what would detect this type of attack, and so those correspond to the procedure cards. So one of the things is like once we come up with a card, then we vet it by bringing in other cybersecurity professionals, and we say what would catch this type of attack. And there's a lot of debate. One of the things that I love is the word "it depends." Right? Like if I hear it depends, then we really dig down into why it depends, if it does or it doesn't. But if I like throw out a procedure and like, oh no, never, I'm like, all right, cool, moving on. And then we go to the next procedure and like, well, it depends. I was like, okay, let's get into that. Why does it depend? All right. So SSO provider compromise. So if you notice, the description says the attackers, some cheeky teenagers. Trimarc did the best they could to be fun.
Cheeky teenagers?
Yeah, fun. And then I'm the fun police of like, no. You can't be fun. You actually, I know it's a fun game, but you have to be able to explain it so that high school students are like, you can't just be snarky, because then high school students don't understand snarkiness because they don't understand the context for the snarkiness, which is why I'm sorry, but I'm the fun police when it comes to backdoors and breaches. All right. So what's an SSO provider compromise?
But we snuck this one in anyway, right? So we got to do the sneaky teenagers. We did also go through probably like several minutes just talking about whatever those two dashes together are, whether we should have used like quotations or parentheses.
That is accurate for sure.
What's the word of that, Jake? I know you know it.
The two dashes? I'm not sure. I don't remember.
It's an M dash.
That's
how every Trimarc meeting gets derailed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you, Brandon.
Sorry, it's because of me. Yeah, sure, I get to talk. SSO provider compromise. This is speaking to your single sign-on. That's what SSO stands for. Kind of an independent software as a service application that handles a single source of authentication that you can basically tie a whole bunch of your backend applications to, and they provide that single source of authentication and access control and things like that. So Okta is one that does that. Azure Active Directory will do stuff like that too. And this card was kind of fun because this was a little head nod to the Lapsus attack that happened. Again, like seems like forever ago, but we did this so many years ago. Like this is just crazy that we've been through this for 18 months or something ridiculous since we started doing it. So it was real big in the hacker news where the adversary known as Lapsus hacked into Okta and then got access to several different entities and providers from there. So this is kind of what's called a supply chain attack as well. So from a defender's perspective, just kind of knowing that your SSO provider kind of extends that attack surface is a good way to help detect and just kind of know what you're up against.
Yeah, I love that the tool is MFA alert fatigue, just to have that conversation. Like, have we reached that tier at our organization? Was someone going to say something that I interrupted?
I was just going to say, Brandon, do you really classify this as well, you said it was supply chain versus an upstream attack. I would probably classify this more as an upstream attack, just because of the method they're using. So the difference is upstream means that it's in line to where your systems are, but it's taken up to the edge of the area. Whereas supply chain could be a software that you install or you distribute in your software or your company use.
And to dumb that down, Dev just did a actually on Brandon.
Yeah,
that's not never mind.
Which is exactly how it's like creating backdoors and breaches cards. Just every single card. All right, moving on.
Moving on.
All right. Weaponized hardware security key. Weaponized YubiKey. Where have I heard of that before?
That one.
Go ahead.
No, you take that one.
No.
Nah, you can take a chick.
So one of the things I believe it was probably 2019, y'all released this blog.
We did.
And it was one of the things that I saw was like a YubiKey, something designed for clear security, can be abused in such a way as to, I mean, what it is you can actually put code on a YubiKey and run code from a YubiKey once you plug it in. And so it's basically a rubber ducky emulator. A very small amount of code that you would run on it, but very small amount. And I fell in love with this attack from then on out. And as soon as I knew that we were working with you all, I knew that we had to call it out. So that's where we're at. Yeah.
Recently, I walked past the YubiKey booth with John at RSA, and I was like, "Hey, John, do you remember that blog that we put out about YubiKey?" He's like, "Shh, keep moving. They're still mad about it. All right, compromised virtual host. Who wants this one?
I can take this one again. So yeah, compromised virtual host. This one I remember particularly because so Trimarc also dabbles in some VMware stuff, and Sean, our founder, gave a talk on the identity nexus. So we wanted to include things like cloud attacks and those low level of accessing the server hardware itself to then getting on the hypervisor to then getting into Active Directory. So we talk a lot about that sort of attack path. So we included a virtual host, and in particularly, we talk about the network segmentation for the virtual host, meaning that whether it's VMware or Hyper-V or KVM or whatever you're running your hardware on your hardware, the management port or the management network for those should not be on the same network as your day-to-day traffic. So the attack path and the initial compromise associated with attacking a virtual host is just network access, being able to fingerprint that a virtual host exists on that network, and then you're able to attack it from there. Yeah. Once you're able to attack and get on the virtual host, then we kind of get into a little bit of that pivot and escalate, which obviously can result in complete compromise.
So for the next card, we have corrupted employees. So in the original core deck, we have insider threat, and insider threat is definitely an employee on the inside. But this is an attack that, like, whenever I mention it to companies, especially C-suite people, when I'm doing a tabletop exercise with them, I wanted, and you all had something similar. Like, take me through the corrupted employee attack. How is this different than insider threat?
So for us, I think the way that we came at it was somebody who otherwise would not have thought about this unless they were approached. We could separate it. It's a lot of semantics for this, but an insider threat is you could think of somebody working for a foreign agency, somebody who was placed there from the beginning, got a job there, and that has kind of been one of their biggest duties was to filter information out, filter data out, just be that insider because that's their job. That's what they're there to do.
Mm-hmm.
This person, it's a regular employee. They joined and they had a career and they went through interview. Like it was a regular employee. But the pay scales aren't always the same. Everybody is different. Curmudgeonly, like not everybody we work with is amazing, Dev. And they could be,
Thanks.
People can be corrupted. It's amazing. Like that's why, a lot of the government agencies are like, hey, how much debt do you have? Because if somebody approaches them theoretically and offers them enough money, everybody is corruptible. So that's kind of how we differentiated it. And then we go through things like, I remember when I was working for a large financial institution, they had a whole insider threat team. And I remember I had to go interview them and they were very reticent about even talking to me. And I worked there. And it's like, once you're onto a person, doing that firewall log review, doing those permissions audits, what permissions does this person have that maybe they didn't have before and they requested? There's a whole bunch of breadcrumbs that you can go back to. So yeah, it's people want money and are corruptible.
Yeah.
And for some reason we put our LinkedIn. I don't know why we did that.
Can I add to a little bit to that? So like when someone's doing an inside threat on analysis on an individual, either for private sector or government sector, some of the qualifications they look for, this will never pick up on. This person would never get flagged for. Like Dan was saying, how much debt do you owe? Where your alliances are? What is your morale been for the last 6 months? Take a polygraph test. Where do you feel about the company standards and where they're going or the government sector? So a lot of the stuff that normally would catch insider threats, this card kind of covers that it wouldn't catch her because that's walking down the street and, hey, give me credentials to your company for $10,000. And like, here's my credentials, give me $10,000. And you walk away. It's as easy as that. I mean, people actually go out, stay in front of the company, look at the local bars, hit up the local bars looking for people who work in the company to then to talk to them or engage them doing stuff like this. And that's what this really covers, is the core essence of that piece of it.
And then when we talk about the tools, people are also awful at keeping their mouths shut. So tools like LinkedIn, now we can come at this from one of two ways. Tools that these attackers that will want to corrupt these people will go after. They will go after these people's LinkedIn. So go after their social media. Oh, you posted a begrudging tweet, or you can see like your mood. People are not that good with their poker faces, and they want to go to their social media. They don't really think about those kinds of things. Where do you go on? So then you hit them up over email, right? So LinkedIn, social media, send them an email, and then also not really good at paper trails either. Depending on who is trying to indoctrinate them into this. So these are tools that you can use. And also, if you're on the investigative side, if you suspect somebody, they're probably not deleting their tweets. They're probably not being very careful, or they might be, but these are possible tools to go and use that from both sides.
Yeah. Or they're saying, I'm giving my 2 weeks notice and I can't wait to start the new job.
Yeah.
What better person to approach?
That's true. We went back and forth with what the title should be, and corrupted is what we ended up with. It's like someone who was not planning to be, but then became. And so I think if you're playing this game, that is the angle that you come at, the initial compromise. So let's move on. Malicious extension. Who wants this one? Also, it wasn't Entra being changed at the time. It was also Azure.
We had a lot of
was
a lot of.
Okay.
We still are doing that.
I can take this one.
Go ahead, Dev.
So there's a lot of browser extensions that people like to install to help ease their burden of either day-to-day activity or just browsing the web. But the funny thing is, there's also a lot of bad extensions out there that has very similar names or that looks very similar to the actual extensions. So one of the attack things that we seen going out there was these extensions that are like it happened in Google Play Store as well, where people were making fake apps, they're making fake extensions, doing all the stuff, and then linking back to the real ones as themselves, and then getting the reputation of the good one when even though they're fake. So you're looking for extension, ad blocking, you find the first one, it has 5 stars on it, has 100 people that are probably fake or being pulled from a different repo. You go to the repo, it looks legit because it is a legitimate repo, but what you don't realize is that repo has nothing to do with the code. So you go ahead and install it. Next thing you know, all your sessions and cookies are being trafficked to a different computer or a different server. And now you just leaked a bunch of information that can compromise your network.
Yeah. One of the things that happened while we were making the expansion decks is that the explanations were so good for what these attacks were, concise and small. And we went back to the core deck and I was like, you should probably fix that.
Yeah.
So thank you, Trimarc, for helping to explain each and every one of these attacks. All right, let's move on to pivot and escalate. So we're going to move into pivot and escalate. And I love these pivot and escalate. We had more pivot and escalate attacks than we had seen in previous expansion decks. So we got golden ticket. Who wants to take this one?
Sean was here.
I'm going to send that one over to you, Brandon, because I want the next one.
Okay, I'll take this one, even though you wrote this one. With your Willy Wonka and Oompa Loompas. This one,
Yet another one we snuck by.
Yeah. Jason tried to kill this one, but this one might have been the one that week he was gone. We snuck it back.
Brandon, that's not Willy Wonka. That's W1LLY. Okay,
it's right.
No trademark infringement here.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not going to get us flagged. So golden ticket attack. This is essentially. I think we actually had the golden ticket in card twice in our initial deck reviews. We had it as the persistence card, I think, because basically a golden ticket is an attack against Active Directory where once you reach a certain stature or you basically become domain admin, you can attack and you can forge your own tickets. When you're talking with Kerberos, which is an authentication protocol that Active Directory uses, if you're able to attack Kerberos and create fake, or I guess technically valid tickets, you essentially have a golden ticket machine, right? So you can create and become and impersonate anyone you want. And we use this for the pivot and escalate card because we leveraged it more as finding a backup of Active Directory. So you have your initial compromise, and then once you're compromised, the attackers would find a backup of your Active Directory, and using that backup, they could exfiltrate the information needed to generate this golden ticket.
Yeah, Brandon brings up a really good point. At any given time during the creation of these, we go, is this an initial compromise? Is it a pivot and escalate? Is it persistence? Is it? And it turns into one of those it depends kind of discussions every once in a while. And so we would settle on okay, in most instances, how would this attack be used? And so every once in a while, people are well, I would yeah, okay. But in most instances, how would this be used? All right. So next card, misconfigured certificate templates, ESC1. So if you know Deb and I, at some point we're does this need to be an acronym? Does it need to be spelled out? Is it normal for everybody? Is it not normal for everybody? Is a high school student going to be able to what is that?
When in doubt, we spell it out for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. When in doubt, we spell it out. That's good.
Jake, should I take this one? You want to take this one? Wait.
Oh, don't you rob that from Jake. He's chomping at the bit to talk about Locksmith.
Jake's it's got my name on it. It's
literally my tool. just let him have this stuff.
So, Active Directory Certificate Services is a public key infrastructure built by Microsoft to be it's secure, but it's also super easy to deploy in an insecure manner. And in 2021, the SpectreOps folks dropped a white paper linked there on the card describing I don't know, 1.5 billion ways to attack Active
Those
Directory
guys are so damn
services.
smart.
They really are. And by far and away, the one that we most frequently find on assessments, the most frequent misconfiguration that we find on assessments is what's called an ESC1. That's ESC is short for escalation. And what that means is that a low privileged user, a regular user, can request a certificate in the name of any other user, computer, etc., in the entire forest, and then use that to authenticate as that person that they are in, that they got the certificate as. And the funny thing is, if you recognized that this domain admin was compromised and you go in and change a password for them, the certificate is still valid. The certificate remains valid until it's marked invalid, or no, that's pretty much it, until it's marked invalid. So theoretically, it's also a persistence method, like we talked about. Some of these things can cross multiple attacks. But yeah, during first starting working at Trimarc, somebody said we need to start looking into certificate services, and I had just set up a PKI at my last job, and so I went, oh, I can handle that. And now 3 years later, I'm the Active Directory certificate services guy at Trimarc. So weird how life works. But yeah, fix stuff with Locksmith. Go grab it.
Just a programming note, Ryan. Looks like we lost the stream potentially on YouTube, but that's fine. All right. Overprivileged group policy, high profile GPO. That's a lot to say. It also feels a little judgy. But who wants to take this one?
Well, Dev would be the perfect person for judgmental.
Wow. I'm not judgmental. I'm just calling it as I see it, Danny. It's not my fault. You are who you are. Let me see. Not fired.
You want me to take that one, Dev?
Yeah, because this is more your
Jay.
area.
All right.
Please rescue Dev.
No problem. So group policy objects are small pieces of configuration data that are stored in Active Directory that basically can apply to all computers in the environment, all users in the environment, etc. You scope them to apply to certain groups of principles in your environment. In this specific card, there is a group policy object linked to the domain root. The domain root is basically, it contains everything in a domain.
Yeah.
And then authenticated users is a group, just like it says, users that have actually logged in. They are valid users. If authenticated users can modify configuration stuff that affects every single computer and user in the environment, they can easily use that to take control of every computer in the environment, deploy ransomware, become any other user. Like, there are a lot of, that basically grants you one step away from compromising an entire domain.
Yeah, because one example was to be like put like a startup script that runs on every single computer and stuff like that.
Yeah,
startup script, deploy software, etc.
Yeah. One of the questions that, like when you play Backdoors and Breaches, when the cards are revealed, you ask your team, is this possible here? And so it gives an opportunity for the team to like, do we currently have any overprivileged group policy, high profile GPO? Like think through, is this possible here? And sometimes the team's like, no, it's not, because we don't have that. And you're like, cool, defend your thesis, right? Like defend why you think that way. And then like, well, because of this, and this. And you're like, all right, fantastic. So it's not always like you don't always have the problem that's on the card. Sometimes you don't have the problem that's on the card, but it gives you a chance to describe that you don't have the problem that's on the card. All right. So speaking of which, we're going to go to the next cards.
And Jason, it's also good. It's also okay to say you don't know and
That's
you
true.
have to look into it.
That is
like,
correct.
I think a lot of people have that fear of, oh, I can't say I don't know. I'm supposed to know, right? But it's okay to say that, because then that flags an area where you can better your security by investigating and researching. So
yeah, when I train incident captains, the thing I always say is like, This is a possible finding from today's tabletop. When the team goes, I don't know, you're like, cool, this is a possible finding from today's tabletop to look into. All right, passwords and 80 attribute. Who wants to take this one?
That's a softball, Dev. You can have that one.
Yeah.
Oh, pass that
Wait, hold
softball
on.
to Danny.
Oh,
Let
Danny.
me see if there's a better one I want to take. I want to take the next one.
All right,
Go ahead,
Danny,
Danny.
you explain what passwords and AD attributes mean.
I'm just a dude that writes the funny tweets. Dude, honestly, you take. Why would you sell me out like that?
Okay, so
include you.
passwords and 80 attributes.
There's other ones. We have the injects that I could talk about. Why would you hang me out to dry on a technical topic?
That's not even that technical, but that's like, you create an account and then you put a password in description so you can remember it later on, or using one of the other attribute fields to, just put any type of attributable information back to the account, password or secret or share. One common way of doing this is I've seen, and it's really not that funny, they go and they put some type of riddle in an attribute to give them a hint of what the password is, which they think they're the only ones who are clever enough to solve. No, just put the actual name to the password that's in your password manager, the title, into it so you can find it in your password manager. That's the best way to do it. Like, don't try to be clever.
On this one, Dev, is that basically any user in the environment has access to read some of these public attributes. So as an administrator, you might think, oh, it's the account, it's a privileged account, stick in the password there, it's fine, nobody else can see it. Well, actually everybody
can see it.
Can see it.
And that's it's very important for when you do automation, like you're using Terraform or some other thing to do auto deployment. Make sure when you copy and paste, you're copying and pasting to the right area, because if you copy and paste the password thinking, oh, I'm just putting it here and it's in the description, guess what? It's going to be pushed out there. So
there's at least like one person watching the webcast right now. Like, I need to go check on something.
Well, it's got to be that too, right? Like when you're playing these games, we talked about like people saying, oh, we absolutely don't have that. But you got to once in a while see that look of realization in somebody's eyes when they really start to think about it. And then they should look across the table and they're like, we're going to talk about this later.
Yeah, I mean, like Terraform, like just putting, people use the description field in Terraform a lot to put all kinds of stuff to check the different variables. Like, and sometimes they happen to put passwords when they didn't mean to. So, yeah.
Overprivileged cloud application. Once again, a little judgy, but go ahead.
Should I take this one too, or should
it's just a cloud app that thinks too much of itself.
So when you create a cloud application, right, you can set different, you should set the minimum amount of attribute or permission sets on it, similar to the GPO kind of process. This is the same thing, but for the cloud applications. So when you, like, for example, if you use a third-party tool and you bring it in, look at the permission sets. One of the worst things you can do is what that permission has right there. Directory rewrite all. It basically means it's a domain admin, essentially. It has access to every object, everything you can imagine in your cloud environment, as well. Not only can it read it, it can write to it and modify. So you want to make sure that anytime you have an application, not only do you vet the application where it came from, who's using it, how it's being used, but also the permission set. We've seen a lot of times where there's people making applications and to sell them, and they just do the easiest thing. Give it all the permissions you can possibly imagine. That way we know it's going to work in your environment. We even see that in some security tools. Yeah, just give it everything. So that way it can scan everywhere. And that is not the right way to do stuff. You want to limit the control of all the applications, especially the ones in your cloud applications. So you'll be happy to know at Trimarc, our tools, we actually do go through and make sure we limit the scope of our permissions. So,
yeah, I totally could have explained that.
Yeah. Also, as you see, like the title, we do the best we can to say like what is being done. So overprivileged cloud application, like you're trying to think of like what action happened or what did someone do. The same thing with vCenter console coercion. Like we're trying to like think that there's an action taking place. And it's in present tense. All initial compromise cards are in past tense. All the rest of the cards are in present tense. And the reason that we do that is because initial compromise is what happened, and everything else is what could be happening right now. So who wants to take the vCenter console coercion?
Oh, that's kind of my baby. So I'll talk on that. That was so. This one points out kind of an interesting thing that we touched on earlier, where it's not an impossible scenario to happen, but this one is a scenario that I couldn't necessarily find any proof that it ever had happened. All of the components of this attack, which involves a denial of service attack, leveraging essentially like a shoulder surf over remote desktop, and then also the ability to take control of a domain controller. And so, like I said, I couldn't really find anything to point to. So we said, okay, you'll just write something, Brandon. And so we kind of just earmarked it. We created the link to the Once Upon a Console, and we kind of printed the card and sent it out to print before that existed. So there was a ticking time bomb of Brandon has to write something. And so for a long time, Danny actually had a placeholder with like a picture of my face on it that said, if you're here, Brandon hasn't written this yet.
It was already live and I had tweeted it out already. Yeah. Like, well, listen, if you want Brandon to do this, maybe you should tweet at Tech Brandon.
Yeah, that's right. That was fun. All right, moving on. Next. All right, so our last pivot and escalate card, server management compromise. Who wants to take this one?
I gotta see the card first.
Yeah, I don't know the card.
I got it.
There we go.
I've got it up. So
you got that?
Yeah, this one's, we'll kind of like just click through this one a little bit. This one's basically about a little bit more about that, where we talked about attacking at the hardware level, kind of the attacking like the ESX server. In this case, it's more so attacking the out of band network. And this one was interesting because every hardware vendor either calls it ILO or ILO, or they call it iDRAC if it's a Dell, and everything calls it something different. But basically, it's the ability to log into the server firmware, and then you can attack the firmware to then get control over the actual operating system that's running on that device. And so the kind of the funny thing on this is that very bottom link is the HPE ILO vulnerability, where basically if you logged in and you typed in 29 A's into the username field, it would just freak out and log you into it. So there's some pretty weird vulnerabilities that hang around, and a lot of times firmware is unpatched. So you patch the operating system, but you forget to patch the underlying firmware on it.
Well, that one I think is a buffer overflow. The 29 A's is the exceeding amount, the max or the cap amount for the actual username that's allowed in code, and then it's overriding the password verification process. So then it's allowing you to then authenticate that.
For those keeping track at home, that was 2 well actuallys for Dev on Brandon.
That wasn't well actually. That was say, hey, let me add some more contacts.
I'm thinking of the people right now. They're like, hey, seeing if it works somewhere. All right, moving on to C2 and exfil. All right. So it is, once you get to like the 5th expansion deck, you start running out of things. You start running out of attacks and start running out of things. And so the reason that we wanted other companies to help us is because they think differently than us. And so this is a C2 and exfil. This is how the command and control and exfiltration of data. So gifts as C2. I remember like,
yeah, really?
They're like,
kidding?
I think Danny should take this one.
How?
Come on, Danny.
No, you could go. The only thing I remember about this card is that we talked about it a lot.
Yeah. And I think
the host of spotlight of your video for everyone. I don't want that.
All right, so gifts at C2. I believe that was my card. This
actually for the injects.
Yeah, because that's where you're gonna shine. But anyway, C2 gifts at C2 is basically in certain. Can we mention company names, or are we allowed to? Like, I don't know.
I don't.
Certain applications that allow discussion and conversations similar to like not this software, but similar to software like Teams. Allow
actually
you
literally in the link at the bottom.
Yeah, allows you to communicate and use GIFs as a way to express your emotions or whatever the case, or make funny actions, or be the only way that Danny communicates with people.
You're explaining what a GIF is. Explain how to use the card.
But what certain applications don't realize is that when they pull the gifts in, they don't actually sanitize the gifts. They don't look and see where the gifts are going, what they have, or what they're doing. So within Teams, for example, you can use the gifts and you can then add aspects to it to then relay information out through Microsoft Teams server back to your own C2 server. And because it's going through Teams or through whatever other applications that allow this, there's no way for you to pick it up on your firewall because it looks like it's going through Microsoft domain. Is a legitimate Teams communication, and there's a lot of it, but it's a legitimate Teams communication, and there's no way to distinguish between what's good and what's bad as far as traffic patterns. And they relay the information back to your C2 server and allow you to continue the attack. If you want more information on exactly how the attack is executed, we did put a link so you can take your time to. It's really interesting.
So thank you. I remember it's just like, okay, explain it again. All right. Yeah. So living off.
By the way, Microsoft said this is not a bug; it's a feature.
It's a feature. All right. Living off trusted sites. How does this work?
So that's another one. I think I wrote this one too. That's another one where you actually could go to lots.project and you can look up and see all the different domains out there that you can leverage to then compromise in some way, some fashion. It could be using applicate whatever website ABC, and then using maybe like a redirect URL to then relay information or whatever. If you go to lots of projects, they have a list. They have how you can utilize those URLs to then exfil data through that domain. And the reason this stands out a lot is because a lot of the domains you see in here are domains that people normally put in the allow list. They use it in the firewall. They say these are trusted domains. We're going to use them. People need to do them for the day-to-day activity. Meanwhile, they can be leveraged to then exfil data without doing any type of deep scan or deep analysis of what data is that's going through it.
Yeah, what I hope is as people are playing this game, if they didn't know that existed, now they're like, oh, I didn't know that existed. Mm-hmm. So it's teaching people. All right, moving on to persistence. This is where the attackers maintain persistence. We have 2 cards. Once again, remember, we started running out of attacks once you get to 5 expansion decks. And so run me through what is admin SD holder rights modification.
All right, so admin SD holder is a process that combines a couple different things, including something called the admin SD holder object. And you can set permissions on this object, and then about every hour, those permissions that you put on that single object get stamped onto every single privileged account of a certain group in the entire environment. So, if you can get control, if an attacker can get control of that admin SD holder object, they can say, please give my user rights over all of the admins in your environment. And even if admins go in and remove those rights manually from each of them, they get re-stamped an hour later. So it is a way to just kind of maintain your control over a domain or forest repetitively.
And by stamp, you mean this basically it writes over the current permission sets with.
That's right. Yeah, overwrites whatever happens to be there at the time. It overwrites the existing permissions. So
Deb and I get an opportunity to talk to a lot of educators, people who are teaching cybersecurity, and they work in universities and high schools and things like that. And even as we're explaining this, they're being introduced to new cards that they didn't know existed. They're being introduced to new attacks. And so if anyone ever plays this game, it's like, I've never heard of that. That's the point of the game. Like, that's what we're trying to accomplish, is like, I didn't know that existed. And if you don't know it existed, then you don't quite know how to protect yourself against it. And so sometimes when these cards are played, you're like, I don't know what that is. Fantastic. That's a great place to get started. All right. So our last persistence card, Cloud Application Impersonation. Who wants to take this one?
I can handle this one probably. And then Dev can actually me by the time I'm done.
Sounds good.
So
hey, I assist. I'm like assisting you. That's all.
So when we're talking cloud applications in this instance, we're mostly focusing on the way that authentication occurs for applications. So in Entra ID, when people log in, they require a password and they may have to MFA, hopefully. But when applications are authenticating inside of Entra, they also need some sort of a password or a secret. So in the case of this card, we're talking about storing that secret password key in a field that is, again, world readable in the cloud environment. So it's kind of similar to the password and description attribute, but the equivalent in a cloud environment. The other piece that I'm still doing a little bit of research into is some of the different and more secure ways to protect those identities in the cloud, where you use a certificate instead of a client key, or you can use something called a managed identity. And so there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different very specific attack methods that go along with cloud applications. Well, actually,
well, no, I was going to say there's tools that actually goes through and scans and look for applications that have the passwords in there, the keys in there.
So those are all the attacks. Thank you, Trimarc, for bringing your expertise, your perspective to help us create attacks. Now, the next part is where I let them have more fun. All right. The next part's the inject cards. And so when you're using inject cards, they either come into the game because you roll a 20 or a 1, or you have 3 failed rolls in a row. Or if the incident captain just wants to throw things around and make things a little more chaotic. And so Trimarc had some fantastic inject cards. And so as we're running out of time here, we got 9 minutes left. We'll try to go through as many of these as we can. So Danny, since they're not really technical, Danny, go ahead. Take us through Bear versus Power Station.
Thank you. This actually came about when we were talking. So a lot of people have always worried about, nation states going to take out our power grid or these, but all of the experts in the ICS field, like the Chris Sistrunks of the world, they are more afraid of squirrels taking out a giant power station than they are of some nation state having an active plan for that. You're more likely to get a bear versus a power station. So this card was just a bear attack the power station for your data center. He's down, but so are you. And you lose 1 turn as you discuss 1, do we have the backups? 2, the difference between the hot backup and the cold backup.
Yeah. You always have to find what happens, right? So the inject happens, but what happens to gameplay? And so there is a lot of discussion well, what do we do? You don't want to be too mean, because if you're too mean, then no one wants to play. But you also want to make sure there's some consequences to when an inject card gets played. So I'm going to skip over to discountconsultant.lol, because you had so much fun with this, Danny. I don't even know if you still have that domain.
Did you still have that domain?
Wasn't that my card?
Well, we talked about it. No, that's when we had the war about who was going to own the domain.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because I sniped the domain from you.
That's right, during the call.
Still doesn't go anywhere. You guys didn't do anything. You had
Danny, I gave you
much
the
time.
I listen.
That's it.
You had 9 months.
That's intentional. I told him to not do anything because I think it's hilarious.
No, I told him we should redirect it back to Danny's LinkedIn profile.
Didn't we also buy the dump.lol?
That's what to talk about.
That's a whole other conversation we get into.
We're not there yet.
All right, Danny, what's the discount? Consultant.lol. Why this card?
I mean, listen, not just because somebody is doing something doesn't mean they're supposed to be doing it. Ever since you hired Scott, he's had you chasing the wrong leads. Turns out he has no real IR experience, but he does have red team experience, and he has recognizes those tactics, techniques, and procedures. So, he failed at his main job that you hired him for, but luckily he was still good for something, which is why you got a discount on hiring him. And then we just say, the defenders must roll the dice. Even if it dies even, you can reveal the instant compromise card, or draw another persistence card. So
you have to draw another card.
Yeah. Either really good or terrible.
Yeah.
I guess I should have interviewed better. I don't know.
And no way is that Scott related to the Scott that works at Trimarc.
That's no way related to Scott Blake, our director of services for Trimarc Security.
Different people.
All right, next slide.
Uh,
All right, this one I want to focus on the center card.
This was my favorite.
All right.
my favorite too.
Yeah. So also my favorite, including the designer, was like, "Is this right?" And I was like, "Yes, it's right." So take me through, dude. Where's our docs?
This is funny because I'm actually still going through when I first started, we were going through a whole redocumentation process. So this was how I got some of my bad energy out. You started a project to fully document your IR, but it didn't get started on time. And by the way, it was never finished. So you have none. So we just the dude where's our docs just came to me.
Even the URL is incomplete.
Yeah.
Dude, not even I even said that at first. I didn't get it. I was like, "Where's your?" Oh, that's slick.
Yeah. So the defender, like the designer's like, "So there's nothing on the image," and I was like, "That is the joke." And it's like the URL is not finished. Also,
very heavy-handed.
Also the joke. Yeah. All right, let's move on. So as everyone can see, there's we got this. But take me through Peekaboo.
Internet of Things, right? Remember that security camera that you set up? And this has been a meme for the longest time because it's an actual thing sysadmins have done. That there's points, especially early on when internet capable cameras came around and it was seen as very convenient. What else is in that server room? Like, it's not just boxes and things. People tack up all kinds of things because they think with all of their security and their fingerprint scanners and their badges and all these things, they're not going to see the posted on the board anyway, unless you have an internet-facing camera where everybody can see it. So, peekaboo.
Yeah. All right. And then our last slide that we have here is the consulting cards. So if you move here, we do have inside backdoors and breaches. Every once in a while, like the momentum's weird. Like people are rolling dice and they get a 4. They roll the dice, they get a 2. They roll the dice, they get a 6. And now they have an inject card that's like negative, and they're like, "Okay, we just need to just switch like the vibe right now." And you can do that by calling a consultant if you roll well, right? Like if you roll a 4 and call a consultant, well, you're not going to get to, and you get to talk through why you can't have a consultant. But one of the things that we do with the expansion decks is we let the team that is building this throw some expansion decks in there, like Jake, like Sean, like Brandon, like Dev. And Sean Bot, I don't know if it made it into the deck.
Sean Bot did not make it into the actual physical deck.
But it's in the online version because you run out of physical cards. Yeah.
We liked it a lot, and Sean got kind of sad when we said we couldn't include it.
Yeah. We even made an LMM just for that bot, just for that card and everything.
So Trimarc, thank you. Thank you for creating this with us. Go ahead, Danny. I'm going to have you sum up everything here with the Trimarc deck, the expansion deck, the development process. Like if you could sum it all up with one final statement, what would that be?
I'm not used to brevity. If there's one thing that I wanted to leave with, it's that you taught us just as much going through this process as people are going to learn using it, because you talked a lot about the wordsmithing, right? Mm-hmm. And as like part of my job here at Trimarc is to do that translation between the marketing and technical and things like that. And you were making us just carve and carve and carve and not think about just one layer of audience, but like 3 layers deep, like Inception, right? To try to explain. You did it wonderfully in the beginning. If you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, that means you can't explain it to a high schooler. That means you can't explain it to an executive. And that really was, so the essence of this game is built in from the very beginning of the first day where we said we should do this. And it's something that I've taken home with me. And it's something that I think about often now, like, have I carved this enough? Am I using too many words when just a few will do? And I think it's that translation ultimately that is really what pushes this industry forward, is being able to explain these very complicated things, these very important things, in not such a high-toned, super technical way. And it does an ultimate justice for everybody. So I think the core thing here is the education starts from the development on up all the way to the person playing it.
Thank you, Danny. And thank you, Trimarc. Yeah, that was good.
That was brevity for Danny.
Deb, I didn't get a chance to have you talk much, but Deb, let's close this out. Your final thoughts on the development of the expansion deck.
Well, this is our 5th or 6th one. For me, you don't have to highlight me, Ryan, ever, but I love getting a chance to hang out with any team that we get to do with. We spend 20 plus hours with over the course of 6 to 9 months.
So
And
many.
just become, we were friends before, but it just deepens our friendship. So for me, that just makes my heart happy. And just, again, like Jason said, like we've run out of attacks. We run out of injects, and to see what they come up with is like, oh yeah, that's terrible. That's awesome. Let's put that in there. So
The first sentence I ever said to Deb was, I hadn't even met her yet. I was like, who is the person that I speak to about backdoors and breaches? And you're like, me. And then we looked at each other and said, we're friends now. And that's how it started.
That's very true. One other thing, you said dumpdump.lol was a site that we actually have. And do you know where it directs to? Jason Blanchard?
No, where does it go?
Directs to your LinkedIn.
Does it really? Dope. All right. So as we close out, thank you so much for joining us for this special webcast today to introduce the expansion deck of Backdoors and Breaches, the Trimarc edition. As you can see, joy and fun goes into making the game, and joy and fun happens while playing the game. But at the same time, education is throughout the entire process. And so if you've never played Backdoors and Breaches, highly recommend you do it where you work. And if you have been playing Backdoors and Breaches and you want to make an expansion deck, or you want to create a card, you're like, we need a card that says this, go ahead and reach out to us, because we're working on a secret project to come out in early 2025. And so that card that you have an idea to do might actually fit into that secret project that we're working on. And with that, Ryan, kill it, Ryan. Kill the fire.
Kill it
That's
again.
it. Thank you, Trimarc, for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Bye.
Yep. Ryan, kill it. Come on, man.